Thank you. Thank you, Isha. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to this Fireside Chat on a very, very interesting and important topic, transnational oil and gas pipelines. And what an honor it is for me to be moderating this discussion between two very eminent panelists that we have. Uh, Mr. Srivastava, let me try and begin this chat by first of all asking you to set the context in the sense that if you could help us develop a perspective, a very broad general perspective on the case for transnational oil and gas pipelines, with a particular reference to the kind of pipelines that we have in South Asia or planned in South Asia. If you can help us begin this conversation from there.
We have pipe gas is cheaper than LNG, and this is the reason why for almost 4 decades EU insisted on preferred importing Russian pipe gas over LNG. In fact, when the Ukraine crisis broke out, there were no LNG terminals in Germany, which is Europe's largest economy, for the simple reason that pipe gas was cheaper. And this is also the reason why Chancellor Merkel, one of her last political acts, standing on the doorsteps of White House, she refused President Biden's request not to go ahead with Nord Stream 2. Now, this was about 6 months before Ukraine crisis broke out. Uh, that changed the equations, but still, pipe gas continues to be a major source of import for major economies. In case of EU alone, despite the Ukraine crisis, pipe gas accounts for 10% of EU's imports. In case of China, which it meets about 17% of its gas requirements through pipe gas from Russia, from Central Asia. From Central Asia alone, it has built 3 pipelines which bring 55 BCM of pipe gas to China, about 17% of its requirement, which is roughly the size of India's total gas imports. And it also has a Power of Siberia pipeline to bring gas from Russia. Now let's turn to our region, and there have been attempts in the past, not successful. One first was IPI, Iran, Pakistan, India pipeline, and the second was TAPI. IPI never took off because of it went through Pakistan. TAPI had the same problem. In fact, it was more complicated because it went through two travel geographies instead of one, Afghanistan and Pakistan. The subsea pipeline from Oman that we are talking about, which is a SAGE project, avoids this pitfall of geopolitics because there is no overland border. And because there is no overland border, therefore there will also be no transit fee. So this is a feasible proposition. It needs to be uh, tried out. And of course, this requires a public private partnership. All the major pipelines the world over have involved governments at both ends, supplier end as well as the receiving end. And the last but not the least is the Myanmar pipeline, which we were interested in upstream. We Indian oil companies could not get the upstream blocks because there was no evacuation arrangement. Uh, and China came, built the pipeline. It has got the upstream as well. So we really need to have a hard look on the need for pipeline.
Yeah, thank you, sir. You refer to the European, development. I want to ask you, post Ukraine, what has been overall, what has been the experience of Europe when it comes to switching from pipe gas to LNG, and what kind of takeaways or lessons that India can draw from that experience? Can you, if you can brief us on that?
You know, post Ukraine, Europe has switched from Russian pipe gas to LNG. Most of it is coming from US, which accounts for almost 40% of EU's gas imports. But Russia still continues to provide about 10%. But what is the difference? The difference is in terms of cost. And Bruegel, which is a very well-known EU think tank, has estimated that the energy gas prices before the Ukraine crisis were double in Europe as compared to America. Since switching to LNG, the European energy prices have gone up from double to four times. And this is straining the European economies, including German economy, which is on the brink of recession.
Okay. Yeah. Uh, Mr. Purwa, let me turn to you at this point, and if you could help us understand what is, I mean, in this entire context, if can you draw for us the entire landscape of pipelines, the way India has looked at them over a period of time, right? And what have been the key attributes of those pipelines, oil and gas pipelines, and some of the key landmarks there in our own story of looking at pipelines, transnational gas pipelines and oil pipelines.
Very, very good afternoon to everybody. First of all, my thanks to ETEnergyworld. I think this in the mid 90s was the one when we started looking at the option of bringing in gas from through deep water pipelines. The challenge at that time was immense because there was the line pipes required. For that, there were the manufacturers were not fabricated, pipe fabricators were not available. The pipe laying barges, they were not available for laying it to beyond the 2000 meter kind of a thing. So 2000 meter also was on the stretched level of that time. And of course, there was always an issue of if in during the operation there are issue of maintenance and then what do you happen. So it continued. I think there has been a lot of the technology evolvement happened into this, and we did today when we started with the IPI, which is a land pipeline. Sometime in towards the late 90s was one which started, but then again it had the approvals from both the government as G2G, that both the parties were looking, Indian government were looking for buying, and Iran's were sitting on the largest pool of a gas. So there has been a great discussion which continued in the year 2006, 7 and until early 2008. And that is when it was kind of a thing deferred because of the geopolitical one for Pakistan. Of course, more so was Iran under sanction. TAPI started almost at the same time. And TAPI, since we started with the TAPI was with between another, as Mr. Srivastava said, it has another element of Afghanistan. So of course, but then TAPI did move a little more than IPI, but today again it is stalled for that reason. That's where this when we started looking at in Myanmar to India, India had two blocks there. We, as one block was with GAIL, where I was a director at that time, and then the other block was with OVL. So with two blocks, with 30% of our share, we wanted to bring that gas to India. So we gave an option of a pipeline. We also bidded for an LNG, which they did. But unfortunately, we were not the winners. It was the Chinese who really took that project from us, and the whole gas went to China. So if you look at from that perspective, that we started in 2008 from TAPI, and today the China has built up 3 lines from Turkmenistan. They started later than us. One from Russia is already done, and then this is a Myanmar line, 5 lines. So that is where this started looking at is which is the Middle East to India pipeline, which now with 3,500 meter of a maximum water depth, there are line pipe manufacturers are there. There are 2 manufacturers in India who are approved. So there are other 6 manufacturers in the world who can supply pipeline. And to this kind of a pipeline, about 1 million metric ton of steel may be required. So you can imagine what kind of it can bring a lot of prosperity to Indian mills, that they can be busy for the next 2 years once if they win the order for getting the. Similarly, there are now 2 companies having 4 barges which can lay pipeline. So in the world, now there are ROVs which can work up to 4,000 meters in water. So there are all these issues which were technological issues were all addressed. Renaissance surveys have been done. It has been found that Oman to India is the shortest route. And above all, there is an icing on the cake which has happened very recently is that UAEs and Saudi, they have declared that they will be surplus in gas from 2027 onward. So that's another source. So you have a source where Oman had declared more finds coming in. There are sources which is coming in from that UAE and Saudi, which can again come in through a land route up to Oman or through an offshore route directly. So this is one line which is a great possibility that you are not getting into any of the conflict zone. And then cost, of course, it has been proven time and again that more than 2000, 2500 kilometer pipeline is the most economical compared to LNG, and economical to the extent of $3 to $5 per million
So
BTU.
this one you're talking about an undersea pipeline, right?
Undersea pipeline.
Now, is an undersea pipeline feasible from a technology point of view? How feasible it is? What are the kind of risks associated as compared to, let's say, LNG or online pipe? Can you help us understand that?
Yeah. Actually, we have done the complete analysis along with the DNV. This has been done by the Middle East to India pipeline, the DNV, all that. There has been an international UK based consultant who did the complete the definition of the risks involved and how it is to be mitigated. DNV has that approved the methodologies and the possibility. And today in the world, there are pipelines which are sitting at 2,800 meters. So already there. So this is only 3,400 meter, and the barges have a capacity. ROVs for repairs and maintenance, they have a capacities for doing it. There has been a fault line also which is there during in this route. The methodology of laying a pipeline, how to avoid those fault lines have also been put in, and that has also been approved by the DNB. So all the technological difficulties which were there earlier, they have all been addressed into this.
Okay. Mr. Srivastava, I want to understand from you, now the entire energy sector globally and in India also is going for transition, right? Now, in the change scenario where energy transition would have picked up pace significantly, how does that impact gas demand and the prices that are going to be there? And what is the kind of role that transnational pipelines can play, right? So, if you can help us understand that.
Energy transition is being driven by climate change and the need to move away from fossil fuel. Now, gas is a bridging fuel. That is, still you can complete this transition to clean energy, you need gas, it lowers emission. And so there's a premium on gas. And this, in India's context, where we are placing a lot of emphasis on renewable energy, even there gas has a role to play because renewable energy always requires balancing power. This is a source of supply to provide an electricity to grid when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing. So this is a requirement which can be filled up by gas. Second is that with the energy transition and increasing carbon prices, the cost matrix changes. The problem today is that there are standard gas assets, power plants in India. Because of the cost factor, that cost matrix will change once the carbon price is introduced, and there's already pressure from Europe. The CBM, carbon border management adjustment mechanism, will become effective January 26, and which will demand equalization of the carbon prices. The carbon prices in Europe today are around 80 to 90 euro per ton. So there will be a huge premium for the gas price driven by energy transition, which will make it possible to consider gas usages in sectors like power sectors where you have standard assets today.
Okay. So I remember around 5 years back there was a lot of forward action from the government side on Tapi. Yeah. Every other day, there were development, and a lot of things were moving forward. But of course, today that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, my question is, if geopolitical situation is a consideration, right, for looking at the feasibility of these projects, then if you look at the situation, what it is there today in terms of geopolitical landscape that we have, it's only become more volatile, right? So, how do you think we are today in a case where we are it's less probable or possible, or it makes less sense as compared to what it was earlier to be looking at projects like this, or how should we go about navigating the issues there?
This is a critical point. Geopolitics is driving the energy prices. There are two crises. One is the Ukraine crisis, and the second is the Hamas-Israel conflict. Now, Ukraine crisis, the effect has been to force Europe to switch to a very large extent, from Russian pipe gas to LNG, basically from US. But since LNG is a internationally traded commodity, that has had a fallout in terms of Asian LNG prices. So immediately after Ukraine war, the Asian LNG prices went up to $55 per MMBTU. Uh, they have come down since, but even today they are much higher, at least 60 to 70% higher than they were about before the Ukraine crisis. I was on the Gale board for 3 years, and I remember that the price line was at that time was about half of today. So this is a result of geopolitics driving up LNG prices. That kind of volatility is not simply a transient phase. Europe is not likely to revert to the Russian pipe gas in a hurry. So this effect will remain. And the corollary is that there's an arbitrage in terms of pipe gas prices, because pipe gas, by its very nature, requires investment in long term infrastructure, and long term, and associated with it means relatively more predictability in terms of both energy security and prices. Now, the second driver of this conflict, which is Hamas-Israel conflict, fortunately, it has not spread to the oil or gas-bearing region, and this is because of a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, the two regional superpowers and two major producers of oil and gas. So as long as it is there, and this is the region we are talking about gas supplies from Oman or UAE or Saudi Arabia. So this is a region which is relatively safer. The third, and you began your question by asking about in the timeline 5 years ago, what is a major difference in our region? Taliban took over in 2021. So that region has become, that is access to, you know, Turkmen pipeline through Tapi, or has become much more complicated today. So the choice really is pipe gas from Middle East.
So what is so we are when we are talking about cost economics of pipe gas versus LNG, what is the delta broadly speaking? Broadly on an average, I know it's difficult, but still, if you could help us understand that.
I think there's a difference of at least $2. Or the pipe gas does not require liquefaction and regasification, the double conversion, which pushes up the cost. So, pipe gas tariff in case of this pipeline is around $1.76. Maybe you can correct. And the liquefaction prices are about $4 or more. So, there's a delta of $2. Mr. Purwaha can
I, yeah, I think it depends on to whether LNG is a brownfield expansion or a greenfield expansion, and whether LNG ships are the newer ones which is coming or the older one. Of course, then you have a regasification facility, which is of course going to be the new one or old also. So when you compare this, if it is an older one, you have definitely have got a delta of more than $2. And if it is all that was greenfield coming in, then it can go, delta can go to $4 to $5. That is the difference between the pipeline. If it is a distance of about 2,000, 2,500 kilometers. So that's an advantage. This is by keeping the gas price at source being the same. So that means the producer doesn't get affected or impacted. Only differential is that producer flexibility of LNG versus pipeline, but he has a firm customer, and then that's an advantage win-win to both the people.
Okay, sir, if I can ask you the last question, if you look at the market dynamics in natural gas, a lot depends on long-term demand, anticipation that is there or projections that are there. Now, is it possible for transnational gas pipelines projects like this to also help create demand in a country like India, right? So, how will you look at that from the point of view of the ability to drive demand?
I think since morning we have been looking at is the demand price sensitivity of demand versus demand. So when we say we can source this gas through pipeline, we have about $2 to $4 to $5 as a range by which we can really negotiate a better pricing than LNG. So if that kind of the amount is passed on to the consumer here, so we expect that there is going to be a much better demand of the LNG. And also, it reminds me of the last lectures which we had from our late president, Dr. Kalam. It was on the 50th year of Engineers India Limited, where in 2015, what he said was what was right 10 years ago is definitely not right today. So I think we have to, the markets are developing, technologies are today when we see it, the pipelines they are not today getting utilized. The similar situation was there when GAIL put in HBJ pipeline. HBJ pipeline was put in for the first 3-4 years. It was being operated for 6 million tons capacity against 18 million. So this movement we have, the even $1, $2, $3 differential comes in, you'll find it will spike the growth. So that's what is.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Let me just add one last bit. LNG is the fuel of choice for the exporter because it gives him more flexibility in terms of destination and in terms of volumes. He can sell small parcels on spot basis. Now, what is the economics for exporter cannot be also the economics for the importer. Importer's interest is the reverse, to get gas on the cheap. The delta that we are talking about till now of $2 to $4 is predicated on long-term LNG supply contracts in a situation which we witnessed last year post Ukraine, where the LNG prices went up to $55 per MMBTU in Asia and $85 per MMBTU in Europe. This formula no longer holds good. The delta becomes much, much steeper. And that is where the advantage of long-term arrangements through pipeline, and especially which have an element of government participation apart from private sector. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, sir. Thanks for that really wonderful session and sharing your insights with us, ladies and gentlemen. This brings us to an end of this discussion. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take, I'm sure.